Hey, what's good, fellas? My name's Andy, and today we're gonna take a look at Isiah Thomas. The older Isiah Thomas. But not what he did on the court. We all know he was a great player, but as y'all know, just because he was a great player on the court does not mean he'd be great in the front office. In this video, I'm gonna go through the full timeline of Isiah Thomas's tenure as the coach and the president of basketball operations for the New York Knicks. Which, of course, includes all of the terrible decisions he made. But before we talk about Isiah's tenure with the Knicks, did you know that he once accepted a coaching job at Florida International University with the goal of helping their team improve? But then he didn't help them get any better, so then he donated his first season's paycheck to the school. This fun fact was brought to you by the Hardwood Amino app. If you want to learn more trivia about Isiah Thomas or any other players or basically anything about basketball, I'd recommend checking out the app. They've got polls, quizzes, articles, and all kinds of fan-made NBA content. You can download it for your Android or iOS device. Just search for Hardwood Amino on your app store. I'm actually going to be doing a couple of Q&As on there soon, so follow me at Andy Hoops and I'll keep everyone posted on when I'm going to be doing them. Anyway, back to Isiah. Isiah Thomas was hired to be the new president of basketball operations on December 22nd, 2003. A few days before Christmas, but unfortunately, this was the worst Christmas present that the Knicks fans could have gotten. Now, to give you guys some context, in the last few seasons leading up to hiring Thomas, the Knicks were kind of falling apart. They magically made the finals in 1999, but that core of players was not going to last. So in that time period from 2000 to 2003, the Knicks lost in the first round once and then missed the playoffs a couple of times. I guess you can say that they were rebuilding, except they didn't have any young talent, so they were just bad. Their core of Latrell Sprewell, Allen Houston, and Kurt Thomas were all over 30 years old and they were missing the playoffs. The franchise was just in a bad place. And then when Isiah Thomas joined the team in hopes of digging them out of the hole, he actually dug them further down, to the point where the Knicks suffered the worst 5-year stretch in franchise history. And arguably the worst 5-year stint of any executive. Okay, so Thomas's first move happened early in 2004. He traded away Antonio McDyess, Charlie Ward, Howard Isley, and the first-round pick for Stephon Marbury. To be honest, this was not a terrible deal at the time. Well, at least it's not as bad as what people thought. Marbury was 26 years old and just came off a season where he was an all-star in Phoenix and averaged about 22 points and 8 assists. Well, partly. Marbury would become a superstar in China. But on the Knicks, he was always very inconsistent and clashed with the coaching staff and organization multiple times. It got to the point where the Knicks actually ordered him to stay away from the team because they thought that he was the reason why the team sucked. So yeah, Marbury did not really work out, and having him and Jamal Crawford as your starting backcourt, yeah, they had problems moving the ball and also had a bottom 5 defense for 5 straight years. In the 2005 offseason, the team was looking for a big man. They were desperately looking for a good center, something that they have not had since Patrick Ewing left. And during an era where bigs were dominating the league, the Knicks needed someone to hold down the paint. And so Isiah Thomas came up with this genius idea of signing Jerome James to a 5-year, $30 million contract. Keep in mind, that was starting caliber money back then. Except, the problem was Jerome James, up until that point, had career averages of 4.9 points and 3.5 rebounds a game. And he was 29 years old too, so it's not like he was going to get that much better. I don't know what they were thinking, giving him a contract like that, but it was something the Knicks got used to. Just 1 week later, the Knicks signed Larry Brown to be their new head coach and gave him the biggest coaching contract in NBA history at the time. They offered him a 5-year contract worth over $50 million. I mean, don't get me wrong, Brown was a great coach, one of the best coaches in history, and just helped the Pistons win the 2004 championship. But this contract was still absurd. Not only that, but Isiah fired him after just 1 season. Although the Knicks were able to come to terms to an agreement with Brown and not have to pay him the full contract. The next move happened right before the beginning of the 2005-06 season. Isiah Thomas was looking for the next great big man to pair with, apparently, Jerome James. So who does he look for? Apparently Eddy Curry? Yeah, Eddy Curry. So he traded away Tim Thomas and 2 unprotected future first-round picks that eventually turned into multiple-time All-Star LaMarcus Aldridge and All-Star Defensive Player of the Year Joakim Noah to the Chicago Bulls for Eddy Curry, Antonio Davis, and a pick that they used to draft Wilson Chandler. I guess it wasn't that bad since they were able to package Wilson Chandler in a trade in the future that got them Melo, although there are some polarizing opinions on Melo's time in New York. Anyway, the trade wasn't terrible at the time because Eddy Curry was coming off of a career season averaging 16 points a game on the Bulls, and he was only 22 years old, so he can only get better from here. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. He did have like one good season in New York, but most of his time there was plagued with injuries and off-court issues. The Curry trade was the one that really set the Knicks back for basically a decade, and in hindsight, this was probably the worst trade Isiah Thomas ever made. So after all these moves, the Knicks had high hopes for the 2005-06 season. They believed that they had a team that was capable of making a playoff run. And Knicks fans were also ecstatic with the direction the team was going. But yeah, as everyone knows, it never worked out. The Knicks finished the season with a 23-59 record, which at that time tied for their worst record in franchise history. Isiah continued to make bad moves throughout the season too. Midway through the season, he traded away Penny Hardaway, who was thrown in with a Marbury deal, and a young Trevor Ariza to the Orlando Magic for a washed-up Steve Francis. Francis would play a total of 68 games for the Knicks, then shortly after, he got traded again and retired. What's even worse is that after this season, Isiah declared himself as the new head coach. I mentioned earlier that Larry Brown was fired after just one season, so Isiah made himself the coach because he thought that he could do better. Around this time, he was still making executive decisions as well, so he continued his rampage. Remember when I said that he signed Jerome James to a 5-year $30 million contract? Well, in the 2006 offseason, he gave Jared Jeffries the same exact contract. He signed him to 5 years $30 million as well. Jeffries averaged 6 points and 5 rebounds a game in his first 4 years with the Wizards, but Isiah took the chance, hoping that he'd develop into a great two-way player. But instead, Jeffries' career took a nosedive, and he actually regressed even more after joining the Knicks. It's also worth mentioning that in the 2006 draft, he also drafted Ronaldo Balkman, one spot ahead of Rajon Rondo. This looks bad in hindsight, but at the time, a lot of other teams missed out on Rondo as well, so it wasn't a huge deal. But it's still kinda funny, he just can't catch a break. So Isiah coached the Knicks for 2 seasons, and he did poorly as well. In the 2007 offseason, he traded Steve Francis and a young Channing Frye to the Blazers for a package centered around Zach Randolph, who at the time was still a head case, and he didn't really help the team either. Finally, to cap it all off, a former executive, Anusha Brown Sanders, filed a lawsuit against Isiah Thomas for sexual harassment. They reached an $11.5 million settlement, but throughout the 2007-08 season, Thomas was getting booed all the time during home games. And finally, at the end of the 2008 season, Knicks owner James Dolan finally fired him, ending his reign of terror. Looking back at Isiah's time with the Knicks, he had arguably the worst 5-year stretch as an NBA executive in history, and all his moves and trades have set the team back for years. Even today, they're still recovering from his poor decisions. You know, we always say how superstars can completely change the direction of a team, but Isiah is the prime example of how an executive can ruin an entire team and also bring so much misery to one of the best fan bases in the world. And that's all, folks. Thank you everyone for watching. I hope you enjoyed that video, and as always, I'll see you next time. Peace.